Trilateral peace talks resume February 17th as Russia reappoints pseudo-historian Medinsky to lead delegation. Europe backs Peter Magyar as Trump endorses Viktor Orban ahead of Hungary elections. And Russian-born speed skater wins Olympic silver for Poland. We start off tonight with the most important security conference in Europe. In Bavaria, the Munich Security Conference is underway. Now let's go live to our correspondent, Aaron Dahmen, who's there. Good evening, Aaron. So we heard both Chancellor Merz and U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio say that the old world order is over. So what will this new world order look like?
The sense here is boom. The global world order as we know it is gone. We've just heard French President Emmanuel Macron waxing lyrical about Europe's strengths while also saying it needs to become a geopolitical power. But this was really Merz's moment in Munich. The German Chancellor also sending a direct and sobering message to America. This is what he told them.
In the era of great power rivalry, even the United States will not be powerful enough to go it alone. Dear friends, being a part of NATO is not only Europe's competitive advantage, it's also the United States' competitive advantage. So let's repair and revive transatlantic trust together. We, the Europeans, we are doing our part.
Now all eyes are turning to Saturday morning when US Secretary of State Marco Rubio will address those leaders. Remember, there is no J.D. Vance here this year to blast political top brass in Europe when it comes to free speech and immigration. But we did get a hint on what Marco Rubio would be telling us tomorrow. Here is that hint.
The world is changing very fast right in front of us. The old world is gone, frankly, the world I grew up in, and we live in a new era in geopolitics, and it's going to require all of us to sort of re-examine what that looks like and what our role is going to be. And we've had many of these conversations in private with many of our allies, and they are our allies. And we need to continue to have those conversations, and I think Saturday, hopefully, and the meetings we'll have there will move us in that direction.
A new era in politics indeed, and with me now is TVP World's Europe editor Marcin Zaborowski. Marcin, we were here last year, we're back again. What are you expecting from Marco Rubio tomorrow?
I think that there is a general expectation that Marco Rubio will be more conciliatory, that he will be more forthcoming and more appreciating of the Europeans. We don't have the evidence of that yet, except for the very fact that he's a known more moderate figure. And number two, that he was urged by a number of of the former American ambassadors to NATO and the former American Allied Supreme Commanders to make a clear appreciation of NATO and to tell the Europeans that NATO is really in America's interest too.
The bar is low, right, after J.D. Vance last year in terms of appealing to the European leaders.
Well, indeed, that's the case. I mean, last year it was a real shock. As you remember, we were here. There was such a shock around the room that Emmanuel Macron, who just spoke a while ago, immediately called an extraordinary summit in Paris to negotiate to talk about the crisis in transatlantic relationship.
And we were there in Paris too. For now, though, 9 a.m. Central European time. All eyes here in Munich, but also all eyes around the world will be on Marco Rubio.
And we will definitely be watching that. Aaron Dahmen and Marcin Zaborowski, thank you, gentlemen, live from a Munich Security Conference there. Russia wants to make a deal, and Zelenskyy will have to act faster, says U.S. President Donald Trump, as another round of peace talks over the war in Ukraine has been set to start on February 17th in Geneva. Now let's go live to our correspondent in Kyiv, Oz Chatterjee. Good evening, Oz. So with more pressure from Trump, can we expect any progress?
Well, here's the thing. We've had 2 rounds of these trilateral talks in Abu Dhabi, which the Ukrainians, at least the Ukrainian government, described as constructive. Now, there have been no breakthroughs in those 2 meetings. Those meetings involved, obviously, the Ukrainian delegation, Rustem Umerov, the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, and President Zelensky's Chief of Staff, Kirill Budanov. So there's been high level from the Ukrainians, and on the Russian side, we've had a high level delegation mainly of military figures. Now, this new round of talks to take place on the 17th and 18th of February in Geneva will be headed by Vladimir Medinsky, who, as you have described, the Ukrainians have described as a pseudo-historian, who has also rubbed up the US delegation the wrong way with his long examples of him giving history lessons in these negotiations. So as far as the Ukrainians are concerned, the Russians are sending a message with the appointment of Medinsky, or should we say the reappointment of Medinsky to head this round of negotiations, indicating from the Ukrainian side that they don't think Russia's very serious about this at all. Now, that's on top of the fact that we haven't had any major breakthroughs made in those 2 rounds of trilateral negotiations between the United States, Russia, and Ukraine in Abu Dhabi. Now, meanwhile, Russia has continued attacking Ukraine, multiple attacks across the country, once again targeting energy infrastructure in Odesa. 9 people killed, 28 injured. Russia launching 154 drones and 1 missile into Ukrainian territory over the past 24 hours. So while these talks are ongoing or expected to begin, this is the reality taking place in Ukraine. And from the Ukrainian side, at least, they seem to think that Russia is just stalling and just trying to buy more time with these negotiating tactics, which the Ukrainians think that Russia's not very serious about with these measures.
All right, Oz Chatterjee reporting for us from Kyiv. Thank you for that. U.S. First Lady Melania Trump said on Thursday that she played a role in reuniting an unspecified number of Ukrainian and Russian children with their families. Ukraine's government says up to 20,000 children were taken to Russia after the February 2022 invasion. Close to 2,000 of them have since returned. Ovidiusz Nichea has the story.
Russia has systematically kidnapped Ukrainian children from the occupied parts of Ukraine. It's for this reason that the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin and his Commissioner for Children's Rights, Maria Lvova-Belova, in March 2023. The plight of Ukrainian children has attracted the attention of US First Lady Melania Trump, who handed Vladimir Putin a letter during last summer's Alaska meeting between the presidents of the US and Russia, urging him to protect children. According to a White House statement, the First Lady facilitated several returns on different occasions, most recently on Thursday.
Today marks the 3rd reunification since I have been working strategically with both nations. I have no doubt more progress will come.
The statement did not specify the exact number of children that Russia agreed to return to Ukraine.
Although all parties are cooperating and our communications remain robust, I urge Russia and Ukraine to intensify their efforts to ensure the safe return of every child to their families and guardians.
The Kyiv Independent published remarks that there are no credible reports or verified evidence suggesting Russian children have been abducted by Ukrainians during the war, and asked the White House for clarification. On the other hand, according to Ukrainian authorities, Russia has kidnapped 20,000 Ukrainian children since the start of the war.
Hungary's election just took a scandalous turn. Opposition frontrunner Peter Magyar has said that a sex tape the government plans to release is real, but politically weaponized, as Prime Minister Viktor Orban fights to hold on to power after 16 years at the top. Will this compromat have a swing over voters in the country? Our correspondent Andrew Sweeney has more.
When Peter Magyar announced that pro-government media in Hungary was threatening to release a sex tape featuring him, the opposition party leader came out swinging.
As you sow, so shall you reap. You will not be able to imitate or blackmail me. Russian Secret Service help and a flood of fake videos will not be enough.
The video is yet to be published, but Magyar's doubling down. He's filing a criminal complaint with the police over the illegal acquisition and misuse of personal data.
Anyone who participated in this political crime, whether as an investigator or a perpetrator, whether from the leadership of the intelligence services or other authorities, or even government politicians, will be held accountable for their actions before the courts of Hungary.
One of those accused by Magyar is Evelyn Vogel, his former partner. He says she also secretly recorded their conversations, acting as a government honey trap.
No sane person can think that I collaborated in this, especially not with the Russian Secret Service. I am ready to take legal action together, but for this, Peter has to see that we are both victims of this.
The general election is scheduled for April 12th, and Magyar's teaser party is leading the polls. The sex tape incident highlights how aggressive the campaign could get and how far Prime Minister Viktor Orban is willing to go to discredit his opponent.
It's not new, this kind of smear campaign. For Orban, he had made sure from very early on to control public broadcasting and large part of the private media.
But in the meantime, Magyar remains buoyant. He's attending the Munich Security Conference, where he's scheduled to meet with Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. Magyar wants to restore relations with Warsaw, damaged after Orban sheltered 2 Polish fugitives from justice. He'll remain hopeful the current scandal won't affect his electoral chances.
Everybody knows it's kind of a dirty game now, the election campaign in Hungary. I wouldn't expect to have a huge impact.
So too, perhaps, is German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who made a cryptic comment about the upcoming elections at the Munich conference.
After the election, which will take place in April, hopefully we will be able to open the next chapters and bring you closer and closer to the EU.
This comes while Orban received another glowing endorsement from US President Donald Trump, who said he was a true friend, a fighter and a winner. For TVP World, Andrew Sweeney.
Mystery murders in the Bulgarian mountains begin to haunt the country's politics. Tension in the National Assembly is rising as the date for snap parliamentary elections has finally been announced. Our correspondent Pavel Chaskovsky unpacks the latest developments in the country.
Petrohan Lodge in western Bulgaria. This is where 3 men were found dead earlier this month with headshot wounds and the hut burned down. 3 more bodies were found in a camper van not far from the lodge. Authorities point to possible ritualistic murders.
From both investigations, we can conclude that one of the main versions we are working on is murder-suicide and suicide.
But this is not all. Migrant smuggling, drug trafficking and pedophilia are mentioned in the case that has captivated Bulgaria's attention. And this week, the case eventually made it to Parliament, where it has become fuel for political blame shifting.
Since this morning I have been listening to you in the media say that the topic should not be politicized. How should it not be, you hypocrites?
Do you think we are not disgusted by what is coming out? You are lying. We are disgusted as well.
You are exactly one of the people who wanted the pedophiles register not to enter into force.
15 minutes recess until you calm down. This will not work like this.
But 15 minutes might not be enough to calm the current political tensions in Bulgaria. The MPs exchanging blows a while ago were representatives of 2 parties that are eyeing their chances in the upcoming snap general elections. The previous Big Tent coalition, led by the conservative GERB party, collapsed under the weight of mass anti-corruption protests in December. The historic first resignation of the country's president followed soon. Rumen Radev stepped down among rumors he would create his own political force. However, the first step to resolving this impasse was made this week as Ilyana Yotova, who took over the presidential seat, finally nominated an interim prime minister. Andrei Gyurov, who until this week was deputy governor of the Bulgarian National Bank, will form a new government.
I assign to you and hand you this mandate to form a government. The expectations towards you are extremely high.
And the new prime minister says he is ready to carry the weight.
I understand what the task is, to have fair elections.
This vote, scheduled for April 19th, will be Bulgaria's 7th since 2021. Over this time, the average lifespan of a government in Bulgaria was half a year. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
Russian-born speed skater Vladimir Sumiruni won Poland's second silver medal at the Winter Olympics in Italy. The 23-year-old delivered an impressive performance in the 10,000-meter race. So how did Sumiruni come to represent Poland? Our reporter Anastasia Yanchenko has the story.
From Russia's Sverdlovsk ice rinks in 2022 to the 2026 Winter Olympic Games in Italy, winning a silver medal for the Polish national team. This is the story of 23-year-old Vladimir Sumiruni, a speed skater who won a bronze medal for Russia at the Junior World Championships in January 2022. 1 month later, he had to pack his bags and leave the country after his homeland launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine, despite a promising career in Russia.
In the junior category, I had the third best results in Russia. I was one of the best in the country. Back then, 4 years ago, I already knew that later I wouldn't be able to travel abroad at all and compete in those cups. So something had to change, because that wasn't good for me as an athlete or for my future.
Sumiruni continued training under the guidance of a coach in Poland. Separation from his family remains a major hardship for Sumiruni, whose parents still live in Russia.
I miss my mum and dad. I call them a lot. Last time I met with my mum was a year ago in Italy. I haven't been able to meet with my dad at all either.
Over time, Sumiruni began competing for the Polish national team and earned the right to represent Poland at major international tournaments. In March 2025, he won bronze in the 5,000 meters and silver in the 10,000 meters race for Poland at the World Championships in Hamar, Norway. Since August, Sumiruni holds Polish citizenship, granted by President Karol Nawrocki. This now allows him to officially compete and represent Poland at the Olympic Games, something he could not do without a Polish passport. In Russia, Sumiruni is wanted for military service evasion. Anastasia Yanchenko, TVP World.
And now we return to our top story. The Munich Security Conference is taking place. So what will this high-level meeting bring in terms of direction for the North Atlantic Alliance and for Ukraine, which is entering its 5th year since the full-scale invasion? Joining us now to discuss is Ian Brzezinski, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Hello, good evening. Great to see you, Ian, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Don, it's good to be back. Good to see you.
Yes, now we hear about the new world order. The old world order is over. Rubio and Merz have both made statements to that effect. So how do you see this new world order emerging?
Well, the old world hasn't totally collapsed, but it's being eroded. And it's in part being eroded by an abandonment to its fundamental principles by the United States. And that's a process that's going to take time, and it's a process that could be reversed. I mean, Trump is going to be in office for another 3 years, so that's another 3 years of perhaps challenges to the old world order. But it doesn't mean the old order is on an irreversible path to decline, or as they're saying in MS at the Munich Security Conference, destruction. I mean, there is going to be a new president in 3 years, and there's probably going to be a handicapped president in about 8 or 9 months when we have our elections here, midterm elections here in the United States.
Right. So do you think there's somewhat of an overreaction here in Europe? I mean, we've seen a very tumultuous year, if you will, since Donald Trump has been inaugurated, and it's just caused a lot of alarm here in Europe. I would imagine you would see some good effects from this, but also some overreactions. Do you think that we're seeing some overreactions there in Munich?
I think actually Munich's really interesting because it's a different tone coming from the Europeans. You know, after the Munich Security Conference of last year, when Vice President J.D. Vance gave his kind of shocking attack on the cultural future of Europe and accused Europe of abandoning its democratic principles, Europe went into shock and almost kind of pleaded with the United States to change course. Now, following the showdown over Greenland, Munich's emerging to be kind of a podium where Europe is not pleading, but it's beginning, I would say, even to assert quietly, calmly, the power it brings to the relationship. Europe is calling on is warning the United States that is doing harm to the international order that has served the United States' own interests, and that doing such damage hurts the United States' interests, and that it can't count on Europe to stand by it, and warns that the United States will lose a lot of its power if it actually has a departure from Europe and the economic and to a certain degree military and political power it brings to the table. So this MSC is interesting for me because Europe seems to be calmly asserting the leverage it has in the transatlantic relationship.
Yes, and it does have leverage, but also Europe has been jolted in action over this past year. Now armies are being rebuilt, hundreds of billions are being spent. How do you think that Europe, the EU, capitalize and emerge as one of the great military superpowers from this moment?
Well, I'm not sure it's going to emerge into a great superpower anytime soon. But that doesn't mean that Europe doesn't have capability. I mean, look at it. This is speaking of Europe roughly, we're talking about a GDP of $25 trillion. That's not much far behind the United States, which is around $28 trillion. Europe has 1.7 million military personnel. It may be dispersed across, some 30 or 35 countries, but that's still military capability. It is America's most important trading partner. It is the greatest source of foreign direct investment in the United States, and America finds most of its foreign direct investment in Europe. So this is leverage that Europe brings to the table and can use to kind of shape the direction of American foreign policy, as it very skillfully did amidst the showdown over Greenland, culminating in kind of the meetings in the Davos World Economic Forum, in which Europe warned basically that, if the United States goes a certain way, Europe will exercise that economic weight. It had $93 billion in tariffs lined up. It had the coercion instrument ready to go, and Trump backed down. And that dimension of the relationship over Greenland has gone on to a more normalized track and hopefully will remain there. But my point is, as Europe has leverage, it seems to be exercising it now more forcefully, but also in a calm, determined way. And I think that's good for the transatlantic relationship.
Now, in terms of further integration, especially creating a common foreign and security policy, nobody is really talking about this over in the United States, here in Europe. There's no serious public debate on how this should be done or whether it should be done. Is this the next challenge for, say, Europe to take this momentum in all the defense spending that it's making and try and get kind of a more powerful position?
I think the way Europe increases its leverage is by fulfilling its responsibility as a member of the NATO alliance. I don't like using the word independent European pillar, but I do like the idea of Europe carrying more responsibility and meeting its requirement. When it does that, it balances the relationship in a constructive way. When I hear Europe thinking about developing a common foreign policy or common security policy through EU, I'm not sure that's the right institution. I don't think that'll be able to move fast enough, be nimble enough. I think that kind of direction in European policy won't come through the EU, but through a coalition of the willing. Probably a coalition of the willing involving the Nordic states, Germany, France to a certain degree, despite Macron's political liabilities and weakness at home, the UK, and Poland. That coalition of the willing can drive a European voice, pull Europe in the right direction, and actually help leverage the United States into a more constructive path of collaboration.
Speaking of President Macron, he has said that Europe should open direct line of communication with Vladimir Putin. He also said recently that at Munich Security Conference that no peace agreement can be made without Europe. You can negotiate without Europe all you want, but there'll be no agreement without Europeans, and this is why we decided to open a direct line of communication with Russia. Now, do you think that this is the way that Europe should head at this junction in the trilateral negotiations that are taking place and set to take place next week?
There's no problem for me in having Europeans talk to Russia. The question is that engagement coordinated among the Europeans and with the United States? What we don't want is 30 different voices and perspectives sending mixed messages to Russia, enabling Russia to create divisions within the alliance. But to have a European voice that's sending a message that's coordinated and consistent with what the United States and other allies are saying can actually be kind of useful. So it's not so much the engagement that's important, it's the message that's being sent.
Well, presumably it'd be a different message because, I mean, if we follow the, Donald Trump's line, the pressure is constantly being put on Volodymyr Zelenskyy to make concessions. Even again, U.S. President Donald Trump has said that Zelenskyy needs to hurry up to meet this imposed deadline of the spring to come to a peace agreement. So maybe it's the approach that the United States is taking that Mr. Macron is so unhappy with. But on a different line, would that work at all?
Well, what we don't want is that. We don't want to have two different voices, three different voices sending messages, different messages to Moscow. And this is where the trick of diplomacy comes into play. And this is where the Europeans, by leveraging their own power, can actually leverage America in the right direction. I believe that if the Europeans were to do more to step up their security assistance to Ukraine, to be a little bit more bold in the way they're approaching the development of the deterrent force, to actually starting really imposing far harsher sanctions, body slamming sanctions on the Russian economy, they would actually pull Trump in the right direction.
Well, that's a good point. Now, there's the authorization of $35 billion from the Ukraine Contact Group. The European Union has approved the $90 billion in two-year assistance for Ukraine. So it looks like, essentially, Europe is owning this war. What more should and could it do?
Well, the economic sanctions are still lacking, just like in the United States. They've been executed in an incremental fashion, and the Europeans are still buying energy from Russia. They're still trading with Russia. So there's a lot more that can be done in terms of directly cutting off economic engagement and imposing secondary sanctions on those who are outside of Europe trading with Russia. There is more security assistance with less restrictions that the Europeans could provide for Ukraine. Europeans could increase their deployments along NATO's eastern frontier to further complicate Russian military planning and to demonstrate commitment. These are the kind of actions that actually I think could pull the Trump administration in the right direction. I can't look you in the eye to say that actually will happen, but I'm pretty confident the current course, the current level of ambition that the Europeans are pursuing when it comes to supporting Ukraine is not sufficient to pull Trump in the right direction. But they leverage their massive economic overmatch regarding Russia, their military advantages over Russia, their alliances compared to those of Russia. They could actually put this war onto a more successful path. And that, of course, would be intriguing to Trump.
It would. Let's hope we see that action and, more bravery from the Europeans. Ian Brzezinski, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much for joining us on World News Tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thanks for watching. Have a great evening, and we'll see you next time. Good night.